And so now we'll be talking about the variables, lists, and matrices. So variables, lists, and matrices all work very similar. Lists and matrices being almost identical, except for the fact that matrices can only hold matrices, right? They can't, or vectors, they can't hold things that lists can. So to work with variables, there's this key up here next to the toolbox called vars for variables. So if you click on that, you can see that there's a bunch of variables that you can save inside your calculator, such as real numbers, right? So if I were to use this, you can see I've actually saved something already to this variable. But if I were to use a variable that has nothing saved to it, it outputs nothing, right? A zero. So it's very cool to save variables. Let's say you were working with a number and you don't want to lose that number because you have to use it somewhere down the line and you don't want to look up through the history, you can save that variable. So to save a number as a variable, all you have to do is press, or let's say we get like a number out here, right? We get 7 on this, that. Let's say this is an answer to something. If we copy this to the command line, which I've showed you before, you double click on it, it being what you want to copy, and then you press the shift key and press STO for store, and you'll see this arrow pop up next to the number. Now you choose what you want to store it to. So if I want to store it to, let's say, variable A and overwrite what I have in there, I press the alpha key to switch to letterings, which you can see all these keys down here on the display, buttons, and you just press the one you want. So let's say I want letter B. So this is saying, essentially, 789 saves to variable B. You press enter, and so now it sends this number again to show you what you've saved. So if I wanted to call what's inside B, I can just say alpha key, press B, press enter, and you can see it's now saved my variable, my arbitrary variable, to B. And that's how you save things to, well, variables, right? And it's very similar for lists and matrices. So the difference between them is if we were to not click on that button and press the shift key and press 7 to access the lists, we can see that we have all sorts of lists in here, right? And let me just clear these up real quick because there's a bunch of garbage in there from whatever I was doing. We can open them up and see that there's the list. And we can see that the list has 10 different, well, things inside of them. And these lists say from top to bottom. So list 1, item 1, list 1, item 2, list 2, item 3. And let's say we go to list 2, we do list 2, item 1, list 2, item, so on, so forth, right? Very nice. Let's change that to something different. And let's say that's 6. So we can write things directly into our lists, or we could save things to lists in the same way we save things to variables. But let's say we wanted to call a list. We come to variables, we come to lists, and let's say list 1. We press enter, and you can see it's now saved our list, and we can call it. So let's say we want to save something to a list. All we have to do is press in some numbers. Let's say 8. I want to save 8 to list 3. I press 8, I press the STO button, and then I will type L and then 3 and press enter. And so if I were to come over to the variables button and go to list and go to L3, you can see that it's now saved that to the list. And that's how you save things to lists. You can also do the same thing for matrices. It's all the same. It's very, nice. So there's 2 ways you can work with matrices in the HP Prime. You can come to the matrices here, and you can see I have junk inside my matrices, so I'm just going to delete that. But you can enter things into the matrices directly. So now that we've fixed our mistakes, if we were to call that matrice to get the determinant, we can see it solves for it. I was making the mistake of keeping these zeros here. You cannot have those when trying to solve your determinant, or it says it's an invalid dimension. Look at me. Stupid, right? Now that I fixed my mistake, you can see I've solved my matrice by, well, removing these constants and then calling my matrix to get the determinant, and I've solved it. But I've gotten the determinant that way. And so you can work with matrices that way, or you can do the not special way, and you can work with matrices directly in the home screen by clicking on the matrix template. Now let's say I have a matrix I want to write down, 55884, right? And I can save this matrix the same way I saved my list of variables by pressing the shift key, pressing EEX to store it. And then I choose the alpha key. I type M, and let's say I want to save it to matrix 1 to overwrite the junk I have in there already. There you go. Now it's saved it to M1, so if I were to call the M1 key, or the M1 matrix, you can see that's in there. And another way, and so you can work with matrix that way by just saving it that way. And you can also just write matrices out this way, and then use the toolbox to solve it. So to solve a matrix without doing all the strange determinant things, you could also, and Cramer's rule and all that, you can use the Row Reduced Echelon Form, which is another way you can solve matrices. It's a little more complex than Cramer's rule, I think, or at least not as complex, but a little stranger. I can work with the matrix directly, and it'll solve my matrix that way, which is very nice. And so those are two ways you can work with matrices. That's how you save the matrices. That's how you use lists and variables. Very useful for those of you that have to use matrices to solve certain things. And that's basically it. That's how this works.